Chapter 1. The Engagement. It's a lovely cold winter day. I'm on a public bus, riding through the beautiful city of Bologna. Looking through the windows, I get struck by a particularly astonishing figure, a 3,796-meter portico of San Luca, which connects the city to the top of the Colle della Guardia high above it, and its magnificent basilica. But what fascinated me most was the fact that even a short stretch of its architectural gem was enough to give an impression of what a zist would look like. I come to a halt in a state of reverie, transfixed by this awe-inspiring beauty. There was a bubbling, euphoric sensation in my thoughts about how beautiful the city was. I stepped off the bus at the next stop, and was gently greeted by a gentleman of renowned nobility. He smiles at me and says, "Hello, sir. My name is Jasper." Jasper was a style icon. When he walks into a room, he attracts attention like a magnet. He was a tall, dark Negro with Hulk-like stamina. His eyes were peach-colored with a crystal-clear cornea. He had spotless black skin and handsome African hair, and his teeth were so white. Jasper had a super-delicious demeanor. Any woman would want to eat him right away, and his smile, oh, his smile. When he smiles, even a girl mourning the death of her cat who was hit by a car while chasing a rat would smile. In fact, anyone would smile. His grin was contagious. It's no surprise that women would lose themselves in his presence. His voice had a deep baritone tone to it. His roar would jolt the gods awake. Damn! What a dominant male he was. Next, I was sitting in the far right corner of the music bar, drinking what I assumed was my final shot. The sexy bartender had compelled me to stay this long, or I would have left earlier. The place was half full, everyone and everything, and was having a bad day, so I wasn't feeling it. I was thinking I'd try the next one, and if it was the same vibe, I'd go home and make love to my beautiful wife, with whom I had a fight earlier, over a message my assistant left in my mailbox. She suspects I'm having an affair, so we had an argument about it, which is what brought me here. I told the lady with a blessed derriere, yes, the fine-looking bartender, that if I didn't have a wife, I would wait until the bar closed and take her home with me. She smiled. So I started flirting with her, and she implored that she likes her men tipsy, so I told her to keep the shots coming. This stunt-looking man bolts in just when I'm about to call for the bill. He's enraged, and you can see disappointment on his face. I'm taken aback a little, thinking that if my case was bad, this man must have come straight from hell. So I took a deep breath and sat down. My interest in him piqued. He walks right up to the counter and orders a few pints, then sighs and says, "This bloody place smells like a rat died in here." I yelled from the back, "Perhaps someone took off his shoes." He laughed and asked, "Brody, can I buy you a drink?" I said I was about to leave, but why not? He comes over to stand next to me, and I immediately began to watch him closely. The guy has tattoos all over him. He looks like a gangster, and he is dressed elegantly in an all-black outfit, a pinstriped suit with a tie, a pinstriped fedora, and a long designer chain around his neck. He wore 3 skull rings on his right hand, similar to those worn by pirates. His Chelsea boots were caked in mud. The scruffiness in his pants gave the impression that he had strangled a wild boar. You couldn't help but notice the strong odor of marijuana on him. He was unconcerned about my stares at first, but when he couldn't ignore them any longer, he asked, "Are you a detective or something?" I replied, "Well, I wouldn't admit it if I was, but by the looks of things, you must have come out of the Hades." "What's the matter with you, soldier?" I asked. "You have no idea what happened today," he replied. "I sure don't," I said in an undertone. He sighed heavily as he sat down on the stool next me. Looking extremely unsettled and anxiously, he reached into his right pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Then, holding one in his palm, he gestured to the bartender for a lighter. He had every right to think I was an agent. I was carefully following his every move. As he spoke, the man's voice shifted from the lowest tessitura to the modal register of a tenor. At first he was fairly curt and terse, but he gradually emptied out his heart. After listening to him tell me his story for an hour, I could see how talented he was at explaining every nuance. Perhaps it was the sheer unpredictability of his encounters that made him such a remarkable storyteller. "This is how the plot unfolds," he explained. "There was a call from an unknown number this morning, and at first I didn't want to answer, but then I had this unsettling sensation in my gut, and I realized I had to. I should have known better than to answer the phone. Once I answered, a voice said, Hello, John. Long time, 15 years, is it? I know you probably believed you'd never hear from me again, but there are times when we just have to get back together with our demons. My heart began to race, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the rest of the story. However, this man clearly needed someone to talk to, or else he wouldn't have started spilling his guts to me in the first place. A pervasive air of secrecy characterizes today's society. It's really bizarre how everyone has become an enigma. I, too, have forgotten the last time I contacted my brother. He is the type to recall anecdotes and introduce new characters in his life. Realizing I had a yearning for a good story to satisfy me, I let my guard down and started to listen intently. After all, home felt like a million miles away after the way I had ended things with my wife. John then continued his spiel. Finally, I had his name. Hello there, John. Hi, is it you I hear? Yes, I can hear your breath. Could you please talk to me? I'm curious, the man inquired. I hung up, John said, but the man called again. I answered the phone and said, I'm sorry, sir, but this is the wrong number. But before I could hang up, he responded, You really need to talk to me. I need to tell you something quite important, John. Unless you want something terrible to happen to your family, do you? After that, I knew there was no going back. I had to engage him, John implored to me. As soon as I asked John to tell me more about the man who called him, I could sense a wave of tension building in the air. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape, and beads of sweat started to form on his forehead. What do you want from me? He muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I leaned in closer, my curiosity piqued by his reaction. I just want to know more about this man, I said, my tone low and menacing, and I won't stop until I get the answers I'm looking for. Suddenly, John cried out in anguish, his voice echoing off the walls. That's where I'm going, he shouted, his eyes wild with fear. I knew then that I had struck a nerve, and that this was going to be a long and dangerous journey. But I was determined to get to the bottom of it all, no matter the cost. As we sat there in silence, the bartender approached us with a tray of drinks, her warm smile belying the dark thoughts swirling in my mind. I could feel her eyes on me, burning with a fiery lust that sent shivers down my spine. But I knew better than to let my guard down around her. After all, I'd seen this before. The way bartenders could lure you in with their charm and their drinks, only to disappear into the night without a trace. As I sipped my drink, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that someone, somewhere, was keeping a close eye on us. And as the night wore on, I realized that the danger was closer than I ever could have imagined. John took a long sip of his drink, his eyes darting around the dimly lit room as he tried to gather his thoughts. He had always known that this day would come, the day when his past would catch up with him and he would be forced to face the consequences of his actions. As he set his glass down, he felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He stuttered, struggling to find the words to explain what had happened. But I could sense that there was more to the story than he was letting on. Who is this guy? I demanded, my voice low and menacing. John hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke. This guy and I go way back to high school together, he said. We were basically old pals. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his words. And what happened? I asked, my tone impatient. John took another gulp of his drink, his eyes clouded with regret. He told me he had been accepted into the military shortly after graduating from high school, he said. He left 2 months later, and I didn't see him again for at least 3 years. My mind raced as I tried to piece together the puzzle. What could have happened in those 3 years? And why was John so nervous about seeing him again? But before I could ask any more questions, John continued his story. A month after that, I had already departed for college, he said. I had actually forgotten about him until I ran into him at a local pub where I was interning over the summer. I leaned in closer, my curiosity piqued. And what happened then? He was in a particularly jovial mood and bought drinks for everyone there, John said. I was hesitant to go meet him because he was in uniform and there were several half-naked girls around. Then he rounded the corner and yelled, John! John! Come here! At first, John tried to ignore him. But as the man's voice grew louder and more insistent, he knew he had no choice but to confront him. And that's when everything changed. As John walked towards his old friend, he noticed that something was off. The man was smiling, but there was a dark glint in his eye that sent a shiver down John's spine. "Congratulations, man," John said, forcing a smile. "I didn't know you were back in town." The man's smile grew wider. "Yeah, I just got back from my tour," he said, "and I wanted to celebrate with my old buddy." John felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't like the way the man was looking at him, like he was sizing him up for something. "What do you mean, celebrate?" John asked, trying to sound casual. The man leaned in closer. "I got a little business proposition for you, John," he said. "Something that could make us both a lot of money." John felt his heart skip a beat. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. "I'm not interested," John said, taking a step back. The man's smile disappeared. "You don't have a choice, John," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You owe me, remember?" John felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He knew exactly what the man was talking about. Years ago, he had gotten involved in some shady deals with this guy, thinking it was just a harmless way to make some extra cash. But it had quickly spiraled out of control, and now he was in too deep. "What do you want me to do?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man leaned in closer, his breath hot on John's neck. "There's a job that needs doing," he said, "and I think you're just the man for the job."